privilege to be here with you today. I am going to be sharing with you on 5 ways that the Lord has showed me I could experience His freedom and stay free. The first way was choosing Him. The second way was entering in and receiving wise counsel through the church. The third way was the gift of healing. The fourth way was making peace with my past. And the last one was making peace and loving my gender. For me, choosing Jesus has been a journey. I can't always say that I followed the Lord, but He pursued me. He pursued me and He laid claim to my life until I was completely and wholly His. I can remember being 16 years old, standing in my bathroom one afternoon, so discouraged because I had embraced the homosexual lifestyle as a freshman in high school. But here I was, a 16-year-old, a junior in high school, addicted to drugs, having sex with men who were older than me, and I didn't want to live. I wanted to end it all. I remember standing there having a plan to take my life when suddenly my neighbor from across the street, who was a Christian, knocked on my door, and she invited me to church. She said I had 5 minutes to get my shoes on and follow her. Later on, I would discover that she had had a conversation with the Lord as she sat in her vehicle preparing to go to church that day. She said she was frustrated, stressed out, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon her and she heard, "Go across the street and invite him to church." She said no, and suddenly felt the Spirit lift from her, and she knew something was wrong. Suddenly, she said she smelled the spirit of death coming from my home, and she knew that she had to go and find it and suss it out and invite me to church. So she invited me to church, and I had on my bell-bottom jeans, my platform shoes, my wild afro hairdo, and a rainbow poncho. And I showed up to the youth group, and they didn't know what to do with me, and rightly so. But I remember the woman preaching that night stopped her sermon. She wasn't even finished. She began, but she was drawn to me, and she said, "I want all of the men, young and old, to gather around this young man and pray for him." And when they prayed for me, I wept, and I wasn't even trying to cry. I had experienced the loving God who drew me with loving kindness to Himself. Now, I didn't follow the Lord because I thought that the LGBT community was my home. Looking back, I can see that the church was truly my home and that Jesus was longing for me to choose Him. But it was a journey for me. You see, I went headlong into the LGBT community, sleeping around, doing drugs, business as usual. I found myself wanting to even be a woman, dressing up like a woman. I remember looking around me and realizing that many of my transgendered friends were dying of AIDS because they stopped taking their HIV medicine. They were being beat up and left to die in fields. I myself began to smell the spirit of death and realized that I was dedicated to a whole culture of death. And I'll tell you what, the allure and the sexiness of it all began to fade. And I realized that the thrill was gone, and I did not want to die and go out like that. So the Lord began to send Christians to me. That neighbor from across the street that I told you about, she was constantly praying for me. She was a healthy person in my life, cheering me on, wanting me to come to know the love of Jesus. So they stuck with me in the place of prayer. She would stand outside with people on her front porch, because my house was directly in front of hers, and they would reach their hands out and they would pray for me, calling me out of darkness and into light. I remember going to church for several months because I wanted to experience the love of God, because I was at a dead end and I didn't want to die. It was a matter of life and death for me. And so ultimately, I chose life because God in his kindness sent a man to me to pray for me the night I came to him. And he spoke such loving words. And it was in the presence of a loving church, a present church, who saw me in my suffering and entered in, that I was able to say yes to Jesus and surrender my heart to him. So the first step was following Jesus and saying, Lord, I'm going to follow you. And I did. And I'll tell you what, he's worth it. He loved me into the kingdom, beloved. He didn't hate me into the kingdom. The second step, the wise counsel of the church. For me, it has been such a blessing to stand in the counsel of the Lord, inviting other people to speak into my life. And not always has it been pretty. Sometimes people have told me the hard word, the thing that I didn't want to hear, but so desperately needed to hear. Things like I needed to open up my heart to people and not push people away. Things like I needed to pull from that place, that deep well that God was pouring into me, and being more in touch with the good of the masculine rather than bending into the old dispensation of acting and feeling like I was a woman. Submitting it, yes, to the Lord, but also to his members. And I'm telling you the truth, it has saved my life. To submit it and say, here it is, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Ultimately, I'll tell you what, I don't experience it as shame. I experience it as good. And I experience it as God speaking into my life and loving me where I desperately need it. The third place was the gift of healing. And for me, it was through the Living Waters program that I was able to experience the Lord in his kindness through the Living Waters program. Provided me with a safe and consistent place where I was able to get real about the unexpressed shame and the pain that I had experienced in my life. I grew up with a mother who was mentally ill, who had several nervous breakdowns. One minute she was there and the next minute she wasn't. I was a child of divorce with no father in my life and no on-ramp to be able to, in the presence of other people, deal with that in a healthy way. And I'm grateful that Living Waters provided me with an on-ramp to meet the crucified Lord in that place and experience resurrection where I so desperately needed it. That was God loving me in that place so that I would be able to know that I am a good gift and that I can offer myself to people and be a good gift to others. Making peace with my past has been something that has not been difficult. Well, it has been difficult, but it hasn't been easy. That's what I wanted to say. Well, yeah, right? It has been difficult. It has been difficult because it's hard to look at the fact that many of my caregivers, that's where the foundation came from. The broken foundations, the foundational wounding came from them. And I was able to now connect with my mother in a healthy way, going through some healing and experiencing it, but connecting with her in a healthy way and making peace with her. My mother is now a believer who's working out her own process, but it's wonderful to know that not only did God intervene for me, he's intervening for her, and that I can be her son, and I don't have to take care of her. I don't have to save her. I can actually allow him to help me to stand in my yes and make peace with my past. The men in my life were not very good, and it was hard. It was hard to make peace with the men who brought me such pain. Ultimately, I can tell you that it's through making peace with my past that I love those men. I love my stepfather. I love my father. And it's something I can't say that I always have. I love being Mexican American. and looking at them and being able to forgive them and grieve the losses, I've been able to embrace them and love my own ethnicity. Last, I can say that making peace with my gender has been ultimately the hardest thing for me. I had to realize that I needed to come to the foot of the cross and surrender those places where I hated being a man. And the best way that I can tell you that I've been able to integrate into this place is being able to say yes to the church. I go to an Anglican church that is spirit-filled, and it is upper, middle-class, white, successful people. And I'm a Mexican American, and I'm the only one. And I'm having to interface with men who in the past would have intimidated me. It was the traditional men that rejected me, made fun of me, rejected me. But ultimately here, I get to bring the good of who I am into that situation, realizing that I embody healing and truth and life, and that I am a good gift to that community. I am a good gift to the men in my life. I am a good gift as a man in this body, as a Christian, wholly sold out to Jesus. I can offer myself as a good gift to them. It's an ongoing process. I don't always do it perfectly, but I do it well through His grace. And I can ultimately tell you that it has been so good to be able to just be a normal guy and learn to make peace with who I truly am, that He is helping me to enter in and become the man that He's always destined for me to be.